Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to GrimQuest Origins. Today we are going to continue the adventures of our character, the legendary Zakma the Hick. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, he's back once again to teach you gamers more valuable knowledge in the world of Origins. So if you guys haven't watched the first part, then I highly suggest that you do, so you can see how Mr. Hick came to be. But if you don't have the time, then here's a little recap of the last Origins video.
Yes, baby, I'm back! Ha. Man, it's so good to be back. Oh yeah. Hello. It's me, your friendly neighborhood evil narrator, back again for more narration stuff. So, Mr. Hick, after successfully finishing his adventures in the first game, has magically went back in time into the world of Origins to help new players and show them the way. He gathered equipment, learned spells and skills. Slowly, he grew in power, and he soon defeated his first adversary, the Fey Avatar. With the Avatar's defeat, he has gained his hands a ship, ready to set sail, eager for adventure. Where will the seas take him? Let's find out.
And this is where the story continues. So we just defeated the Fey Avatar and with it gained ourselves a ship. This means we are now able to move on to different dungeons on the map. But more on that later. Let's first discuss the ship. So let's go to the shipyard down here, the low harbor, and as you can see here, we now have a caravel. Before anything else, let us first rename our ship to something a lot more appropriate. And the perfect name for our ship is none other than Forever Virgin. Yes, that is a perfect ship name right there. It doesn't get any better than that. The Forever Virgin, ready to sail the 7 seas. Perfect, just perfect. Now let's talk about the crewmates. As you can see down here, you can get at most 3 crewmates. There are multiple types of them available, and they all benefit you in their own way. Unless you get an aristocrat as a crewmate. Aristocrats are garbage crewmates. Just ignore them. Crewmates give you passive bonuses which will benefit you hugely. For example, Remy Dream Chaser over here, who is a cleric of Oberith, which gives a chance to restore HP per turn. That's pretty good. But some crewmates have better abilities than most, like West Redveil over here, who is an occultist which gives a chance to heal for the amount of damage we deal to the enemy. That's basically lifesteal, which is insane. Another amazing crewmate is Aidan Clanblade, who is a knight bodyguard which gives us a chance to block physical damage. These 2 crewmates are among the 4 best crewmates in the game, along with the barbarian mercenary which gives us a chance to stun the attacking enemy, and the Muata Acolyte which gives us the chance to ignore damage from enemy abilities. These 4 crewmates are the best out of all of them, so it's worth keeping an eye out for them and hiring them whenever you can. Now let's move on to the ship upgrades. If you've played the first game before, then you'll know that the ship upgrades are similar to the council upgrades in GQ. Just like in GQ, all ship upgrades are good and very beneficial for the player. The real question here is, which one should we get first? It is important that we get the upgrade sleeping bunks first. Getting this upgrade will allow us to recover HP during dungeon runs. It works similar to the outdoorsman skill in GQ, except in Origins is a ship upgrade and a lot more expensive. The next upgrade you will get after getting sleeping bunks is Liquor Cabinet. It works the same as the sleeping bunks except it restores morale. After getting the Liquor Cabinet, we will be earning for the Tarot Parlor here. It is a passive ability that increases the chances for dungeon events to appear. After getting the Tarot Parlor, we will be getting Arcane Dampener next. This upgrade reduces the encounter chance for those pesky elementals, which is generally useful. After getting these 4 upgrades, you can earn and get whatever upgrade you want next. It's important that you prioritize getting these 4 upgrades as they will help significantly in your dungeon runs. Now for the dungeon progression. Here in Origins, the progression is the same as in the first game, but it's more simplified. Basically, just literally finish an entire dungeon first before moving on to the next. And by finishing a dungeon, I mean defeating all the main bosses in it before moving on. If you move to other dungeons too early, then you'll find yourself underpowered most of the time, and that's generally a bad thing. Now the skills and spells. But first, the skills. This is pretty self-explanatory. Since our weapon type is hacking, then naturally we will be getting all 5 of these hacking skills whenever we get the chance. If you are going for a mage build, then invest in the arcane tree. The only skills you need in the arcane tree is Theurgy, Gnosis, and Meditation. You can just skip the other 2 skills since they're not that much help. Important note, do not take skills from other weapon types other than your own. They don't work for any other weapon type, even the passive skills. For example, if you have a stabbing weapon, you should only take skills from the stabbing skill tree. If you take skills from other skill trees, they won't work for your weapon. Another important note is the arcane tree. It is a totally separate skill tree and it is not affected by any weapon type. Now for the spells. And yes, this is going to be a long explanation for spells individually. So if you don't like that, then feel free to skip and just go through the guide, taking whatever spells I take in the playthrough. First, Dragon's Breath. This is hands down one of the best spells and literally the best starting spell in the game. If you didn't take this as your first spell, then you just failed in life. This spell is an AoE spell that damages 2 adjacent enemies and inflicts a debuff which lowers enemy armor. Literally a must-have spell. Next up is Thunderstrike. One of the best offensive spells in the game. It deals high and consistent damage as well as a chance to stun enemies. Another must-have spell right there. Earthen Sphere. No, just no, this spell is absolute garbage. It's a waste of money and a spell slot. Just leave it aside and never pay attention to it ever again. Creeping Cold. This spell is an AoE spell which deals damage to all enemies on screen. Despite its low damage, no, I'll stop. This spell is actual garbage. But since it's the only other AoE spell that's actually usable, it may serve some purpose. Still, I would not recommend using it. Aether Bolt. This is an offensive spell that deals decent and consistent damage to an enemy. It also has a debuff which lowers enemy spell resistance. The spell also has a 1-turn cooldown, which allows for spell spamming. This spell is definitely a must-have spell for mage builds. Arcane Armor. This is a buff spell which increases maximum HP and armor. This is not recommended for use on early game and on short fights. Arcane Binding. This spell is pretty similar to Reaper's Size in the first game. It is a buff spell that increases melee damage and restores HP upon killing an enemy. As powerful as this spell may seem, it's actually pretty trash. I would not recommend using it at all. Ethereal Rain. This is an AoE debuff spell which lowers enemy spell resistance, as well as increases your chances of getting critical hits for spells. Definitely a must-have spell for mage builds. Important note though, this spell is solely a debuff spell. It does not deal damage to enemies whatsoever. Insect Swarm. A single target debuff spell that lowers enemy armor and prevents enemies from using their abilities. This is a very useful spell especially in boss fights and long fights. Due to its mute debuff, this spell can be generally used by any build, but it is best utilized by melee builds since it lowers enemy armor. Death Bloom. This is an AoE spell that deals low damage to all enemies on screen. Despite its low base damage, this spell inflicts damage over time in the form of poison to all enemies affected, as well as lowers their damage. This spell is generally useful to all kinds of builds. Cycle of Life. This is a recovery / buff spell. This is the best recovery spell in the game, with the bonus of increasing your melee damage. There is one downside however. In order for the spell to work, there needs to be an enemy corpse on the field. The spell uses the corpse to heal and buff you up. This ultimately means that this spell is completely useless in 1v1s and only usable in duo and trio fights. This spell also makes enemy corpses disappear. This is actually an advantage for the player, since some enemies have the ability to revive their fallen allies. So if the corpse is gone, then there's nothing to revive. Simple. Definitely a must-have spell. Aspect of the Beast. Literally the same spell as in the first game. It buffs all of your physical stats up in exchange for morale loss. Absolutely not recommended for use on normal fights. Only use this spell for bosses or mini-bosses. Important note, using this spell disables your ability to cast other spells, ultimately meaning that this spell is only intended for melee builds. Healing Light, more like healing trash. Absolute garbage, never take it, just ignore and leave it to rot. Word of Power, an AoE spell with a chance to inflict a mute debuff to enemies. This is another generally useful spell due to the mute debuff. Temporal Shift, a buff spell which increases critical chance and evasion chance. Not recommended for use for early game and mid game. Spirit Shield, this spell is a buff spell that's absolute trash. Oh my lord, seriously, why? Why does this god-awful spell exist? Just delete it, please. Chaos Ball is a single target spell that is literally the same as Arcane Blast in the first game. Despite its wide damage range, this spell is actually one of the high damaging spells in the game, with a bonus of inflicting a random debuff on the enemy. Still Essence is an offensive spell that heals you for the amount of damage dealt to the enemy, with an added bonus of boosting spell power. This spell is a must-have spell for mage builds. Entropic Field, probably the best buff spell in the game. This spell deals damage return to enemies who attack you, with an added bonus of inflicting stuns to attacking enemies. Very useful against boss fights and in long fights. Definitely a must-have spell. And last but never the least, Disintegrate Essence. Absolutely the best debuff spell in the game. Similar to the Confusion spell in the first game, this spell stuns enemies for 2 turns, with a chance to instantly kill them. Overall useful in any situation and usable by any sort of build. Absolutely a must-have spell. If by some reason you don't want to take this spell, then that means you just failed in life. And with Eridius's defeat, this marks the end of the main story and the end of the video. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video as much as I had fun making it, and hopefully you found this video useful in your adventures in the world of Origins. Once again, I thank you for watching and see you guys in the next one.